auxiliary. All right. We don't want the Ostion cake. Display. So this is the graph. I don't want this view though. Slideshow from current slide. Sorry, it's been giving me issues today. I apologize. Here we go. Duplicate. This is the graph, right? This is the active force, there's the passive force, the total force is the combination of the two. So if you're missing one of the components, then you're not going to be strong. Okay? Can you jump higher? Can you jump higher if you start from here? Or can you jump higher if I start you here, make you jump down, and then make you jump up? If you understand this graph, which one? The second one. No, I wouldn't start you that high, but this is sort of exaggeration. That's pretty high, okay? But you can actually jump higher, and the explanation is the same. Because when you hit the ground, you load the rubber bands of your muscle. They're not the rubber bands, right? They're elastic fibers tight. And then you can actually jump higher. So it's kind of cheating, but it's real. It's a real effect. Yeah. Question?
Where did you get that graph?
Yeah, it's not in your notes. I added it. It's not your PowerPoint?
Where did you get that graph?
I will give it to you. I will send it to you. I added it a couple of days ago. And the reason I added it, because I always draw this by hand. And so I'll send it to you. I'll just send you out an email with just the graph. Okay? But this is, I usually just do it by hand. I actually found this and I thought, somebody else did this. Why not? Let's put this in there. So this is a really important graph. Okay? Good question. All right. So we're going to start switching gears a little bit. So this is a little bit of bio. This is like really basic bio. Very big bio. So what I want you to know from this is not that bad. All right. So you're looking at a skeletal muscle here, and you're looking at 3 types of energy systems. Okay. So you have 3 energy systems in the body. You have an energy system that involves going through glycolysis, through the Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. So the types of activities that require that type of energy system are long-distance types of activities. Slow activities, like walking. You could walk all day long, and you're producing energy through this pathway, right? Through this pathway. You're going to go all the way from glycolysis through what's called the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, and then oxidative phosphorylation. So anything that is sort of slow and steady, slow marathon type activity, walking, will have you go through glycolysis, then to something called the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle, the same thing, and then to oxidative phosphorylation. It is a slow way for your muscle to produce ATP because it takes time to go through these 3 steps. If you need energy much more quickly, you can bypass temporarily, you can bypass the Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation, and you can just use glycolysis to make ATP. The problem is that glycolysis doesn't make as much ATP as the entire process would. Right? You're getting a few ATP out of this, whereas you're getting 30, depends on how you count it, 34, 36, 38 ATP every time you go through this cycle. Okay? So when would you use this? This is activity that you would normally use, like maybe you're lifting weights, maybe you're running a little bit faster, so not a full sprint, maybe like event-wise, maybe you're looking at like an 800-meter type thing, which is brutal. Things where you need energy much more quickly. You're running faster, you're swimming faster, you're cycling a little bit faster, but you're not at max. You're not at max, and you're not going slow trotting. Right? The third energy system is called the phosphocreatine system. This system is really designed, its maximum output time is about 10 seconds. So any activity that requires a massive amount of energy output for no more than 10 seconds. So the perfect example for this is the 100-meter dash, the 100-meter sprint, right? Roughly at the world-class level for both males and females, we're looking at 9 to 10 seconds. That's what it is. This is the system they're exclusively using. They're bypassing all of this. This stuff is too slow to produce ATP. So there's a couple of different ways here to do this. Creatine phosphate, which your body naturally makes, your liver makes, and you eat. You can get it from meat, fish, chicken. Beef has a lot of creatine phosphate in it. Okay? What it does is it can donate a phosphate in that you can turn ADP, back into ATP much more quickly. This is what's called substrate level phosphorylation. You're also making ATP back here, and so they show it here, but it's not as fast. So why am I telling you about these? Because you have different types of muscle fibers, right? And they work with different parts of the system. Some work better with the entire system. Some are really designed to work really with the phosphocreatine system. There's a test, and a few people wanted to do this in the lab. Unfortunately, we don't have a cyclopedometer. They wanted to do what's called a Wingate test. And a Wingate test is a way of looking at power output for human beings, and it's 10 seconds. We don't have a cyclopedometer. Okay. So, 3 systems. When any activity that lasts less than 10 seconds. So how intense is this activity? Really, really intense. Really, really intense. Full sprint, maximum weight lifted, things like that require this system. Now, you pay a huge debt for it, right? Because you have a backlog of ATP that you have to make in order to pay for the debt that this creates. This is sort of why high-intensity interval training is very, very good for burning fat long-term with a short period of time, because what you end up doing is you acquire a debt. It's called EPOC, post-exercise oxygen consumption. And you have to pay back that debt. So the activity may have only gone for 10 seconds or 20 seconds, and you may have done this 40 times, but the debt you have to pay back goes on for days. And that's where the fat burning comes in. It's based on this idea. Yes? Josiah.
So if you're working out and you're taking creatine, would that affect your fat burning level?
No. So the question is, so you can actually take, this is actually a supplement, creatine phosphate, you can actually buy it. It's never going to hurt you if it's a salt. If you take creatine phosphate, it allows you to extend the period of time that you can go with the system, and it also allows you to do more with the system. So what would happen if you were on creatine phosphate is you get stronger. And the reason you get stronger is because you have more creatine phosphate to make the ATP. Will you get leaner? Yes, in a sense, but indirectly, because if you can push harder than you normally could, the amount of debt that you create, the energy debt, is much greater. Therefore, while you're at rest, while you're sleeping, while you're sitting here right now, you actually burn more calories. That's where the burn is. It's called an afterburn in layman's terms. It's not what we call it in science. Afterburn. Basically, you rev up the system so hot, that even when you're sleeping, the system burns hotter. And so it's not what you burn, So let me give you an example. There was a study done by a guy named Tremblay. Everybody's heard of Tabata? Have you heard of Tabatas? Tabata is a Japanese researcher who looked at this and was looking at the difference in VO2 max between someone that you trained for 45 minutes, 6 days a week, like a typical runner would, right, versus someone, and he did this with elite Japanese short track speed skaters. Okay, that's who he used. Elite Japanese short track speed skaters. And then, so he took one group and he did that. And he looked at what their VO2 max is, the maximum amount of oxygen that you can consume. Okay. And the VO2 max is an indication of how good you are at an endurance event. So the higher your VO2 max, the better you are as an endurance athlete. Then he did the same thing. Tabata did this. And he had them, this is what he did. Brutal. Try this. Let me know how it goes. All right, you get on a bike, on a stationary bike, and you cycle for 20 seconds as hard as you possibly can. You rest 10, and then you do it again. 20 on, 10 off. 20 on, 10 off. Do that 8 times. And tell me if you don't want to beat my face in after. Because I'm pretty sure once you get the energy up, you're probably going to want to beat my face in for telling you to do this. It is brutal. Okay? They created, so what ended up happening when they looked at the VO2 max changes, this is something that had never been shown before. They showed that in order to increase VO2 max, not only did the sprinting group increase their VO2 max more and it didn't plateau, but they also increased their lactic acid threshold or their anaerobic threshold, which the other training cannot do. So that's what Tabata did. Tremblay then went and said, hey, let's look at what happens with these two protocols, with this protocol with fat burning. So the Tremblay study is the one that's quoted all the time. So he did the exact same thing. And he looked at how many calories the endurance group burned 5-6 days a week, 45 minutes, versus the number of calories that this HIIT type group did, high intensity interval training. So when you looked at the calories that they burned, the group that did the endurance training, they burned 9 times to 12 times more calories than the group that did the sprinting. So you're like, okay, well, look, we don't need to hear anything else, right? They burned 9 to 12 times more calories. But here's where the rub is. The group that did the sprinting burned 9 times more fat than the group that did the endurance training. Now, there's some weirdness they did with the calculation. They cheated a little bit. It's probably more like 3 times. But the end result is the same. So there's a debt that had to be paid. And that debt continues. If you're untrained, that debt can continue for 3 days. If you're trained, it's 24 hours. Okay? So in terms of, I'm slightly getting off topic, but I want to sort of put this energy system in perspective for you. So that's why things like CrossFit, okay, some things like boot camp workouts, anything that's high intensity, Insanity Asylum, PiYo, P90X, P90X30, P90X2, P90X3, all have some of this built into it. Right, where you go really, really hard for 30 seconds or a minute. It's all based on these energy systems, okay? Because they know you can do more intense work for a shorter period of time and get an afterburn. So you don't have to, because years and years ago, it was true that people would go for hours and hours and hours, and they would run an hour a day, 7 days a week, and then they wonder why they're not losing any fat. It's because your body hates you. It does. It hates you. And so to spite you, it's going to actually make you fatter, which is sort of counterintuitive, right? It's actually going to make you fatter. That's proven. So anyway, sort of off the topic. Okay, 3 energy systems. This one, 10 seconds or less. This one, you're talking about an activity that only lasts a couple of minutes. This one is, half hour, 45 minutes, a couple of hours, so in time length. So creatine phosphate, glycolysis is number 2. The glycolysis Krebs cycle, oxidative phosphorylation is number 3. Okay? that make sense to everybody? That's important. Now, why am I telling you all this? Well, we've already looked at tetanus and fatigue. All right, so you can, and we'll get to why that's important in a second. Isometric contraction, we use a stimulus, we get to tetanus, and eventually we'll fatigue. Why is the muscle fatiguing? Because you're building up acid. You're producing lots of hydrogen ions, lots of hydrogen ions. Okay? So that's one of the reasons your muscle fatigues. You're not able to make as many cross bridges anymore because you don't have enough ATP to dislodge the myosin head from the actin. And the less you dislodge it, the less you can put it back. So the ATP becomes a problem. You put lots and lots of potassium into the extracellular space. Is there supposed to be a high concentration of potassium in the ECM? There should be a resounding answer to that. No. Where is it supposed to be high? Inside the cells. That causes problems with contraction. Okay? These are the types of things. So this is what causes fatigue. And your book has a few more that it goes over, right? Then you give it a little bit of rest, and then you do the same stimulus again, and you can see that you can do it again. Does that make sense? Okay. So in skeletal muscle, repetitive stimulation leads to fatigue, evident as reduced tension. Rest overcomes fatigue, but fatigue will reoccur sooner if inadequate recovery passes. Right? This is true. If you've ever done any type of sport, any type of training, like if you're going to go really hard running, right? How do you feel after that? Everybody's sprinted before. Everybody's been a kid and run a race as fast as you can, right? What do you feel like after you've run as hard and as fast as you can? You're huffing and puffing, right? You're going to pass out on the ground. It's hard to breathe. Your heart rate's going as fast as it can. Your breathing rate's going as fast as it can. You feel like you can't catch your breath. You may get dizzy. You may see spots. All kinds of crazy stuff, right? So that's what happens. But after something like that, what kind of a rest do you need? A little bit. A little bit. But if I'm running like this, and I do that for the same amount of time as that full sprint, and then somebody says stop, and then they say, well, how long do you think before you can go again? About 2 seconds ago, actually, I could have gone again. So, right? You don't need a lot. There's just not intense activity, right? Okay. So here's 3 types of muscle cells. So within muscle fibers, there's different subtypes. There are what are called slow oxidative, fast oxidative, and fast glycolytic. Slow oxidative, fast oxidative, and fast glycolytic. If you look at this is the amount of tension in milligrams, doesn't matter, over time. In the slow oxidative muscle fibers, they can maintain this level for a long period of time. Okay? They can maintain. So if you're an endurance athlete, you're really calling upon these types of fibers. And you're actually going to increase those number of fibers a little bit. Now, everybody is born with a different subset of types. So everybody is actually born with a different percentage. If you are very, very good at endurance events, really, really good, not just mediocre, but really, really good, the reason that you are really, really good is because your parents made it that way. Your parents gave you the genetics, and part of the genetics is they gave you more of these slow oxidative fibers than the average person. And so these are people that are really, these people love go. They're long distance swimmers, long distance cyclists, long distance runners. They just love it. It's not a big deal. They don't understand why everybody else is huffing and puffing. It's not a problem. 8-9 mile runs every day. No big deal. It makes me want to puke. I mean, I'm not one of these people, right? So I'm just not. I'm average. But so that would be that extreme. Okay? Everybody else is sort of has has a certain number of these, an average number of these. So everybody is capable of some endurance capacity. But the really, really good ones at the Olympic caliber level, the NCAA 1 level, they don't look like you and me. The number of these fibers are just higher. Now, there are certain muscles within your body, now I'm talking about the whole muscle, that have more of these fibers than others. Okay? So if you look at the calf muscles, there are two calf muscles. The one that is underneath, all right, and the one that is on top. The gastroc is the one that's on top. It's the one that has a diamond shape to it, if you look. All right? And the other one underneath is called the soleus muscle. They're both part of the calf. The soleus muscle is predominantly slow twitch. The gastroc is the one really that allows you to get lift and speed. So the gastroc is the one that allows you to generate power. They work together. One's a power, one's an endurance one. One is more of this, and one is more of this. And they work together. But they're both a mix, right? Most muscles are a mix of all three of these, the whole muscle. But individual fibers may be this, this, and this. Then you have the medium type muscles, and they're called fast oxidative. And if you look at those, in order to produce that amount of force, right, they can do it, but what starts to happen pretty quickly here? The force tails off. All right, so 60 minutes in, this muscle cell type looks the same. It produces the same amount of force. 60 minutes in, this is about what, a quarter? All right, so it's not really endurance, but this is also producing, if you put these on top of one another, this line is actually taller than this line by about that much. So this muscle actually, it's not as good as endurance, but it can actually produce slightly more force. It just can't do it for very long. Okay? And then the final one is this fast glycolytic. Now, the fast glycolytic can produce the most amount of force. They're also the biggest muscle fibers. We're going to take a look at the graph. So, but, look at this. By about 2 minutes in, you're at about a third. Okay? By about 2.5 minutes in here, you're at where you'd be at 60 minutes here, and you don't see here. So these muscle fibers are the ones that produce a lot of force, but they just can't do it for very long. Okay? Now, those names are important. Oxidative, fast oxidative, and fast glycolytic. Where do we get that from? This. The oxidative muscles are going through, they're getting most of their energy going through the entire glycolysis Krebs cycle oxidative phosphorylation to make ATP. Okay, so they're predominantly like that. The fast glycolytic only use this part of the energy production system and can use this part, but we're not going to talk about this right now. So that's where they get fast glycolytic. Go back here. So this is fast glycolytic. It's only using glucose. So if you do, I try to bring everything back to practical. If you do sprint activity, if you do weightlifting activity, the muscles that you're affecting the most, the muscle fibers that are the most important to your activity, are these fast glycolytic. Glyco. Glyco means sugar, meaning glycogen. This type of activity is very, very dependent on the amount of carbohydrate that you take in. If you're sprinting, lifting heavy weights, doing anything like CrossFit, and you don't have carbohydrates in your system, you're insane. That doesn't make any sense. Physiologically, it doesn't make any sense. You're not getting the most out of it. Because the muscle fiber types that you predominantly want are this, and these need sugar. These two types of fibers, the activities that they use, it's not as important. You can have less sugar. This is immediate sugar. This is muscle glycogen. This one you just need enough to have your muscles filled. It's not the extra sugar. As long as your muscle and liver is filled with glycogen, you've got enough sugar in your system. This type of activity, the slower the activity, the more you rely on fat for ATP production. And it's from the glycerol molecule, from the fat. Right? So I could walk 20 miles a day. We probably all could. It would be miserable at the end, but we could all walk 20 miles a day. And we would probably burn predominantly fat with some carbohydrate. If you're sprinting, if I said, well, I'm going to go outside and we're going to do 10-second sprints, you got to go as hard as you can. You're not burning a lot of fat during that activity. It takes way too long to make energy from fat. You're doing this. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? If you look at these fibers, let's see where that is. I'm going to skip this for a second. Here. This is a picture of what these fibers look like. The fast glycolytic fibers, the motor units, they're the biggest skeletal muscle fibers in your body. They're really, really large. So if I'm looking at 3 fibers, you would see something like this. Remember, a muscle fiber is a tube, right? You would see that. That. Fast glycolytic, fast oxidative, slow oxidative. You see the difference in the fiber type? So the same thing I said about the fiber type with the Olympic caliber athlete with the number of these applies to anything with power. Gymnastics, sprinting, track and field, Olympic weightlifting. Those people, that's power, right? It's the amount of weight moved per time. They have more of these than you and I do. They were born with them. Usain Bolt, right, fastest human being ever, has always been the fastest person he's known. Since the day he was born. He could probably beat the pants off of 99% of the people he ever encountered before he ever started training for the Olympics. Why? Because his parents made it so. That's why. I don't care how much you train me, how much money you spend on me. You could pump me full of steroids. I could look like a Greek god, do everything else. I will never, ever even come close. I'm pretty sure that if you gave me a 50-meter start, he would still beat me. That's the truth. Right? It's because this makes a difference. Everybody's born with this. Most people, and they've done this study too, most people, 50% of your fibers are this. That's average, 50 to 55%. In those athletes, the Olympic caliber athletes that we're talking about, you're talking about 75, 80% of their fiber type looks like this. And the ones that are the endurance ones, the ones that win the marathon, they're the opposite. They're 75, 80% of their fibers look like this. Those people will never be really strong. They just can't be because they have too many of these. And then this is somewhere in the middle. And these are the types that can actually convert. Some of these can actually go in this direction, and some of these can actually go in this direction. So it's kind of interesting in physiology. Okay? So this is just showing you the different sizes. Okay? So these are the glycolytic, right? These are the type, the medium one, fast oxidative, and these are slow oxidative. Okay. So these are factors determining muscle tension, action potential frequency, how long the fiber is, how big the diameter is, and fatigue. I'm just going to show this to you. I'm not going to make you calculate this on an exam. It's a little bit of physics, but just to give you an idea. So this shows the flexor muscles, right, or the bicep, and in this case the triceps or extensors, right? And if you're doing a bicep curl, right, anything that's on this side of the arm is going to be an agonist muscle, and anything that's on the back end of the arm is going to be what's called an antagonist, right? Quads, hamstrings, agonist, antagonist. And which one's the agonist and which one's the antagonist depends on which movement you're doing. Whatever movement you're doing is the agonist. Whatever movement you're not doing is the antagonist. Okay. So quadriceps, right? These are different, anterior chain, posterior chain. So this is just showing you an equation. I'm not going to make you do this. You don't have to know how to do this. I just want to show it, okay? It's really not that hard. This is taking a look. If you wanted to calculate this, so some of strength, how much you can move, has to do with lever systems. Okay, so it's not just about the passive and the active component of the muscle. Some people are stronger than others because of where their muscle originates from and where it inserts. Okay? And depending on where your insertions are, that can make you stronger or weaker. So that's physics involved there. Same size person, same weight, same height, same age, same health. The one that has the better levers is going to be stronger. That's just the way it is. Right? So you take a look at the difference here from where the muscle begins and where the tendon inserts. And then you take a look at the difference between where the tendon inserts and the end of this lever system, and you look at the weight. And in order to lift a 10 kilo, 22-pound ball, you actually here, at this point, have to apply 70 kilograms of force. It's not really efficient, but that's the reality of it. So again, you're not going to have to do this. All right, so this just shows you there's a little bit of physics here. Muscle contraction velocity, the hand velocity, just showing you what happens. All right, disease, a little bit of a disease. Duchenne's muscular dystrophy is a disease where the dystrophin complex, when you look at muscle, when you look at the muscle cells, there is a complex that's on the outside of a muscle cell. So this is a muscle cell, right? This is the intracellular component, and this is the extracellular component. There is a complex, and I'm just going to draw it as a circle, that connects the inside of the muscle to the outside of the muscle. It's called dystrophin. Dystrophin. It's a connecting protein. Okay. In you and I, assuming nobody here has muscular dystrophy, okay? In you and I, every time we move, this dystrophin complex gets damaged. It's normal. It's supposed to. Everything, when you move, gets damaged, right? In you and I, it gets repaired. And when you do that activity again, you get stronger. So from the time you were little to the time now, continue, even into old age, when you do this, you continue to get stronger. Okay? Part of it's because you grew, but part of it's because these proteins are just getting stronger. In somebody that has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, when they damage this, it cannot repair itself. So what ends up happening is they're fine usually up until the age of 2, 3, 4 years old. Okay? Something happens where this dystrophin complex no longer can repair itself anymore. So now when they move, they create damage that cannot be repaired. So what ends up happening to these people is over time they can't get up anymore. They lose their ability to contract the muscle because it's not anchored as well anymore. The dystrophin protein anchors the muscle to the outside. And when you can't do that anymore, this is what starts to happen. So they have this really weird posture, and eventually you end up in a wheelchair. And your diaphragm muscle, right, which is a big dome-shaped muscle under your ribs, is also a skeletal muscle. With a lot of these muscular neural diseases, this is how you end up dying. The same thing happens to the diaphragm muscle, and so you can't breathe anymore. So you have to be they have to do all kinds of funny things. They got to put a trach in, they got to put you on a ventilator, and then eventually there's nothing they can do for you anymore. All right, but it's because of the dystrophin complex. It is a structural protein. And all of the forms of muscular dystrophy are the same in that the dystrophin complex, this is called a costomere. The connection here, this thing, this complex is called a costomere. Right, kind of like a sarcomere. On the inside, the costomere is structural. And that's what ends up happening in someone with muscular dystrophy.
So the other forms of muscular dystrophy, is it when that exploited, like take longer for that?
Some of them are just takes longer. Some of them, this complex is really, there's a lot of different proteins involved, and so they don't all affect the exact same part of the complex of these proteins. Some of them start later, some of them are more severe than others. Some of them have partial ability to repair, where the worst kinds don't. Like they go downhill, and usually, by the time they're in their 20s, it's almost over. So, depending. So that's what muscular dystrophy is. It's actually it's not a nervous system problem, right? This isn't like multiple sclerosis, different disease, right? This is a structural protein problem. It cannot be repaired, or it cannot be repaired sufficiently, and the muscle then cannot contract anymore. All right, I think this is the last thing we're going to do. This is these are smooth muscle cells. Remember we went through that sheet, and I took you through skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle, and I said we'll come back. You have that sheet. You'll take a look at it, and there's an explanation here. But smooth muscle doesn't look like cardiac muscle or skeletal muscle, right? It doesn't have sarcomeres per se. It has these dense bodies, and notice how they go in different directions. It's got like this meshwork. Remember, these are the muscles that surround your stomach, your esophagus, your intestines, your bladder, your blood vessels. And so they have to go around tubes, essentially. So they're not linear, right? When they contract, this thing actually contracts from every direction at once. Does your bicep contract from every direction at once? No, because it's only going up, down, right? It's not contracting from the outside to the inside and from this angle to that angle. These muscles can actually do that. That's why they look like these puffy, fat cells. They're not. Okay? They have thin filaments and they have thick filaments. But the lineup is different. Right? You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 thin filaments to 2 here. It's a different ratio. So here's the way this happens. So this is the easiest way to learn this. It may be easier than the sheet I gave you. I'm the first to admit that somebody does something better than I do. So if you look at the role of calcium, and this is the contraction, right? Calcium ends up binding to troponin here. But here it binds to a calcium protein called calmodulin. So it forms a complex. It's called a calcium calmodulin complex. The complex, okay, they come together, they're friends. They're like, okay, here we are. They then bind to the light chain. Okay, the light chain is, here's a 50-50 chance. Is the light chain attached to myosin, or is the light chain attached to actin? What is the light chain part? Is it part of the myosin complex or the actin complex? Myosin. It's part of the head. Where's troponin located? Yes. So you control skeletal muscle on the actin filament. You control smooth muscle on the myosin filament. A little different. Okay. The myosin light chain kinase then uses ATP to phosphorylate cross bridges. This is very different. This does not happen here. Right? Once this thing connects to that head, it phosphorylates these cross bridges, meaning that head is now active. How is that different than in skeletal muscle? In skeletal muscle, the head is always active. there is no off switch for it. As long as it's cocked back, it's going to attack. This one, you actually have to activate it. If this doesn't bind to the head and actin, the well, in this case it's not tropomyosin, but let's say it wasn't covering it, the two don't connect. Right? In skeletal muscle, as soon as the tropomyosin comes off of the actin, what happens? Cross bridge, boom. In smooth muscle, it doesn't, unless the head has been phosphorylated with calcium calmate. Okay, this is a sign. This is a sign. All right, so that is it. Cleaning up my files. All right, that is it for muscle. Important things. Understand the relationships here. Understand the different types of fibers and energy systems. And understand the difference between this and skeletal muscle contraction and cardiac contraction. We're going to start the cardiovascular system on Friday. All righty. Okay.
Bertino, we're meeting today, right?
Yes.